Of the hundreds of strange stories I've covered, this one stands apart because it's not about what someone claims to have seen. It's about what investigators found afterward. In September 1961, a couple drove home through New Hampshire and arrived hours late with no memory of where they'd been. But here's what gets overlooked. Their car had strange circular marks that made compasses spin wildly. Her dress was covered in an unidentifiable pink powder. Their watches stopped and never worked again, and 5 different laboratories would spend decades trying to explain why. Betty Hill was 42 years old and worked as a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. She had earned her degree from the University of New Hampshire and held a management position, which for a woman in 1961 was no small accomplishment. She was intelligent, educated, and, as her colleagues would later describe her, remarkably level-headed. Not the type to make extraordinary claims or seek attention. Her husband, Barney, was 39 years old and worked the night shift as an assistant dispatcher for the Boston Post Office, commuting from their home in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Barney was a World War II veteran and served on the New Hampshire State Advisory Committee. He was also the legal redress officer for the local chapter of the NAACP, working to end racial discrimination in their community. He once joined a lawsuit against a barber who had refused to serve a black customer. Barney was not a man who backed down from difficult situations, and he certainly wasn't prone to exaggeration. And so here's what made the Hills remarkable even before that September night. Betty was white, Barney was black, and in 1961 that made their marriage the kind of thing most people whispered about. They faced significant societal challenges simply by being together, and yet they had built a quiet, respectable life. They attended a Unitarian Universalist church in Portsmouth. They were active in civil rights causes. They were, by every account, ordinary citizens living ordinary lives. Neither Betty nor Barney believed in flying saucers or alien visitors. As their niece Kathleen Martin would later explain to interviewers, the Hills weren't the type. They were practical people focused on their work and their community. If anything, Barney was the skeptic of the two. He'd later recall his wife asking him after seeing something strange in the sky, "Do you believe in flying saucers now?" And he replied firmly, "Of course not." On September 19, 1961, Betty and Barney decided to take a short vacation. They loaded up their 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, put their dachshund Delcy in the back seat, and drove north to Niagara Falls and then to Montreal, Canada. It was supposed to be a few relaxing days away from work. They stopped at small restaurants along the way. They took in the sights, and on the evening of September 19th, after enjoying a final meal at a diner in Vermont, they began the long drive home to Portsmouth. The route would take them south along U.S. Route 3, a winding road that cut through the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Traffic was sparse that time of night. The moon was bright. The sky was clear. By all accounts, it should have been an uneventful drive home, and for the first few hours, it was. It was around 10:15 p.m. when Betty noticed something odd. There was a bright light in the sky that at first she assumed was a falling star, but it was moving in the wrong direction. Instead of falling, it appeared to be moving upward and following an erratic path across the sky. She pointed it out to Barney, who was driving, and he figured it was probably just a satellite or an airplane heading toward Canada. But the light kept pace with them as they drove. It seemed to follow them along the road, and that's when Betty became concerned enough to urge Barney to pull over. He stopped at a scenic picnic area just south of Twin Mountain so they could get a better look and also walk Delcy. Barney was worried about bears in the area, so he retrieved the .22 pistol he kept in the trunk of the car. Through binoculars, Betty watched the object traverse across the face of the moon. It was spinning, she noted, flattened and circular, with multicolored lights around its rim. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Still, Barney remained skeptical. He figured there had to be some rational explanation. They got back in the car and continued driving. The object followed. Near the area known as Indian Head, about 1 mile south of the landmark, The craft suddenly descended and hovered directly in front of their car. Barney stopped in the middle of the empty highway because the windshield was now completely filled by whatever this thing was. It was hovering maybe 100 feet above them. Barney stepped out of the car with the binoculars, and that's when he saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Through the lenses, through a row of windows on the craft, he observed between 8 and 11 figures looking down at him, and they were somehow not human. Barney would later tell investigators that one of the figures seemed to communicate with him, not verbally, but through some kind of impression that told him to stay where he was and keep looking. The beings were wearing glossy black uniforms and black caps. Red lights on what appeared to be batwing fins began to extend from the sides of the craft. And that's when Barney tore the binoculars from his eyes and ran back to the car. He was in near hysterics. He told Betty they needed to get out of there immediately or they were going to be captured. And so Barney floored it, and they sped away down the dark highway. But that wasn't even the strangest part of the night. As they drove, they both heard an irregular series of beeping or buzzing sounds that seemed to bounce off the trunk of their car. The vehicle vibrated. A tingling sensation passed through both of their bodies. And then their minds went fuzzy. They both described it as entering an altered state of consciousness where everything became dulled. A second series of beeping sounds brought them back to full awareness, and when they looked around, they realized they were now driving near Concord, New Hampshire, nearly 35 miles south of where they had just been. 2 hours of their journey had simply vanished. They arrived home at approximately 5 a.m. on September 20th, several hours later than their trip should have taken. And immediately, both Betty and Barney felt that something was wrong. It would turn out that the physical evidence they discovered that morning would become some of the most documented and analyzed artifacts in UFO research history. Betty felt compelled to leave their luggage near the back door rather than bring it inside normally. Barney was drawn to examine his genitals in the bathroom, though he found nothing unusual at the time. Both of them felt an overwhelming need to shower, as if they were contaminated by something. Their watches had stopped and would never work again. Barney noticed that the leather strap on his binoculars was torn, though he had no memory of it tearing. The toes of his dress shoes, which he had freshly polished before the trip, were badly scuffed as if he had been dragged across rough ground. And when Betty went to put away her clothes, she discovered her dress was damaged in ways she couldn't explain. The zipper was broken, the hem was torn, the lining was ripped, and, most puzzling of all, the dress was covered in a pinkish powder that she had never seen before. She hung the dress on her clothesline, and the pink powder blew away in the wind, but the fabric remained discolored and damaged. She threw the dress away, then changed her mind and retrieved it, hanging it in her closet. Over the following decades, 5 different laboratories would analyze that dress trying to identify the substance. But perhaps the most unsettling discovery was on their car. When they examined the trunk of their 1957 Chevrolet, they found something that hadn't been there before: shiny, concentric circles on the metal surface. Betty got a compass and moved it toward the spots. When the compass got close to the circular marks, the needle would spin wildly. When she moved it away just a few inches, it would drop back down to normal. In 2003, chemist Phyllis Budinger conducted the most thorough analysis of Betty's dress ever performed. Her findings, published through the Black Vault case files, eliminated every natural explanation. The stains were not urine. They were not perspiration. They were not vomit. The location of the discoloration, primarily on the back and underarms of the dress, ruled out any spill that Betty might have caused herself. The material came from an external source that science could not identify. The proteins present were water-soluble, suggesting moisture had been involved. But there were no high molecular weight insoluble proteins, no carbohydrates, no uric acid. Nothing that matched any known substance from Betty's body or from ordinary environmental contamination. In 2004, DNA analysis was performed on the dress. Human DNA was found, along with something unexpected: DNA from a funnel weaver spider. but nothing else could be conclusively identified. The researchers, much to the disappointment of those hoping for proof of extraterrestrial contact, stated they could not confirm DNA evidence from other than earthly sources. And yet, the mystery remained. If the stain wasn't Betty's perspiration and wasn't vomit and wasn't any ordinary contaminant, then what was it? How did it get there? And why did it cause such unusual damage to the fabric? The circular marks on the car were never definitively explained either. The compass anomaly was documented by multiple witnesses who visited the hills in the days after the incident, but the car itself was eventually replaced and the evidence lost to time. 4 months after the encounter, Barney developed a ring of warts around his groin, in the precise location where he had felt compelled to examine himself that first morning. A dermatologist removed them by electrolysis, but no explanation was ever given for why they appeared. And then there were the hypnosis sessions, where both Betty and Barney, interviewed separately, recalled remarkably similar experiences of being taken aboard a craft and subjected to medical examinations. Dr. Benjamin Simon, the Boston psychiatrist who conducted the hypnosis sessions from January to June of 1964, never publicly declared that he believed the Hills were actually abducted. He theorized that Betty's vivid dreams in the weeks following the incident may have somehow transferred to Barney. But he also acknowledged that this theory didn't explain everything. It didn't explain the missing time. It didn't explain how their independent stories matched so precisely while containing unique details specific to each witness. And it didn't explain the physical evidence. Barney Hill died of a cerebral hemorrhage on February 25, 1969. He was 46 years old. Betty continued researching UFO phenomena until her death from cancer on October 17, 2004, at age 85. She never remarried. Their case was filed under Project Blue Book as insufficient data. The Air Force concluded that the Hills had probably mistaken the planet Jupiter for a UFO. They offered no explanation for the marks on the car, or the damaged dress, or the stopped watches, or the 2 missing hours. The Betty and Barney Hill archive is now housed at the University of New Hampshire. The dress is still there, still unexplained.